Tales from the wild. Stories from the heart. A journey into the mind and soul of fired-up business professionals where they share their vision for the future. And hear from a different non-profit organization every month as they create awareness of their goals and their needs. Dive into a world of untamed passion as we join our host, Shireen Buerta, for this month's episode of Friends from Wild Places.
So I have to ask like the $1 million question. So from a little girl with your mom watching the television shows, then solo watching the shows, then getting into the field, and as you shared, all undergraduate, graduate, and masters. Undergraduate, your master's degree and your doctorate. What can you sum up just from like a perspective to say, what does cause the criminal mind? Like, like what causes it? Like, because my background, unlike yours, is more on the death side, like actually like death investigation. But I have a bachelor's in criminal justice as well. And I always like to do like how did somebody do this? Or, like more on that side. So can you share a little bit as far as like what in all of your, whether it's personal research, working in the field, working as a probation officer, which, my God, that could be a whole podcast in itself, and now teaching, what do you think drives people to do the devious behavior?
It's multifold. There's not just one thing. Depending on what it is, it could be greed, it could be jealousy, it could be revenge, it could be an ideology, right? Whether it is a social ideology, a religious ideology, it's so many different factors. It could even be stress. It could be a combination, of different types of stressors, right? Financial stressors, family stressors. So it depends on the person. I've learned that depending on the day, many of us can resort to committing a criminal act. It is about self-control. It is about understanding who we are that keeps many of us from committing those crimes. Have we thought about doing those crimes? Absolutely, especially on I-95. Absolutely. But what stops us from committing those crimes are what we call those protective factors, right? Those things that protect us from committing those crimes. Your family, your faith, your community, your job, right? You don't want to lose these things. So when people lose some of those protective factors, right? So they now have risk factors, they commit the crimes. Many times I've asked my probationers, why did you do this? Right? Did you not think you were going to get caught? Again, I'm still trying to understand. Did you not think you were going to get caught? And many of them was like, so what? They didn't have protective factors. They didn't have a mom at home waiting for them saying, please don't go out there and do X, Y, and Z because my heart would be broken. Many a times they were running with the wrong crowd, right? They didn't have someone to look up to say, young man, young girl, let's do something productive with our time. They didn't have that. So when you take away those protective factors and you introduce all these risk factors, people commit crime, right? The adults as well, right? Sometimes it's just about jealousy. I don't want you to succeed, or I want what you want, or what you have. But self-control for a lot of us is what keeps us from committing these crimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so
Fascinating.
And that's the best $1 million question you could have asked, Tanya, because that is something that we all want to know. Like, what on earth are you thinking? But listeners, before we continue, let me just jump in here and talk to you about Buzzsprout. Friends from Wild Places is a place we share stories from other business owners, professionals, entrepreneurs, educators. A safe space this is to show support for each other in a world that can be very lonely and can be tough, and be support and inspiration is lacking. So this podcast is here to inspire people to make that first jump, to open their first business, to be that entrepreneur, talking about career choices, and to hear other people's inspirational stories of how they got to where they are. This is it, inspiration right here. And this is what we do here at Friends from Wild Places. We also feature nonprofits every month to try and make a difference, to give a helpline to someone in need. So the question is, do you have a message you want to share with the world? Or maybe you just think it'll be fun to have your own talk show. Podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online. To start your own podcast, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you, and it does support and help the show. So remember, the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Now, Nancy, we just talked about the crazy public reaction to the Luigi Mangione case. In your years teaching criminal justice, have you noticed that the public's psychological fascination with criminals have shifted, or have human beings always been wired to root for the anti-hero?
Okay, so crime, killing is as old as time. We can see the first recorded killing in the sacred text, right? With Cain killing Abel. So there's always been crime. The public appetite, I think I think the public appetite has changed, right? So remember, I spoke about my mom and I watching these soft crime shows, Murder, She Wrote, Magnum PI, what's another one?
I remember Murder,
goodness.
She Wrote because I watched it as well as a child.
That too, right? Right? These shows, though they, centered around things that people did, these murders, it was about solving a crime. It was about following the detective, about, getting justice. Then we're moving away. There's a shift from the soft crimes to procedural crime shows. So NYPD Blue, Cagney and Lacey, those shows as well, where it was a little more gritty, if you will, right? So it was a little more realistic. And then you go into the podcasts and the books. So from that, the appetite of society grew. We love to hear about who done it, how did the detectives, solve the crime, and whether or not there's an anti-hero. And if so, were they fighting for us? Were they fighting for the underdog? Were they fighting for the little people? And if so, we're going to root for them, right? That's why Robin Hood, the movie, I think 4 or 5 of them, was so popular, because we understood as a society that you have governments, you have institutions that are a lot of times set up against the little folks, against the regular person. So when we have these TV shows, when we have these podcasts, these books and everything, we're going to root for the one who's going to shed light on injustices always. And I think society nowadays has more of an appetite for that sort of that sort of event. And that's why this case, the Mangione case, he was able to raise, $1.2 or $1.5 million. Well, yeah, because people are like, I understand this, right? My child was rejected for a surgery. My mother, my son, my daughter, my wife, my husband, they understand it. So because of that, they're like, yes, whether or not they agree with murder or killing of a human being, it almost becomes a separate question, right? It's more so I identify with the reason behind what was done.
Mm. That's powerful. That's powerful, Nancy. Yeah. Yeah. I have a question. I just want to jump in because it's so fascinating just having the opportunity just to ask you questions and sit here this morning. But one of the questions I have is when you have students and we're both professors at Miami-Dade College, obviously in Miami, Florida. When you see students having, sitting in your classroom, what is the expectation of the student? Like, for example, like where do they think they're going to go, and what is the reality? Like, because you said like you've done many things within the criminal justice field. I shared I'm in criminal justice, but I don't do what you do. I'm in the death care. So I'm just fascinated to see what up, like from the college perspective, if you want to speak on that, your classroom, and what is the reality? What kind of jobs can students actually pursue, like realistically?
And when I like the first day of class, that is one thing I share with my students so they can have an understanding that the criminal justice field is very broad, right? So I will share my right? Because many times a lot of these students think that we wake up as boom, as a professor, we wake up as, FBI agent, we wake up as these things. But I often tell them, I had a humble start. I started in retail and I was putting out my resume out there and I waited for that call. And that call came while I was on the floor in my retail job saying you have an interview for fraud investigation that Monday. And I think it was a Friday. I got the call and so I told my boss, I won't be in on the weekend. Sorry about this. And so that began my journey. And when I tell my students that I was in retail, it kind of gives legitimacy to the journey because they're like, oh, okay, so if my professor, who's Dr. So-and-so, can say that she started off at retail, then I'm okay. I'm the stress, you can see the stress leave their face and leave their body because they're like, oh, okay. So I was a fraud investigator, I tell them. Then from fraud investigation, I was an enforcement officer for child support. And then from that, I was a probation officer. So I tell them all of these things to let them know that the criminal justice field is wide and varied, right? So that you can do so many different career paths within the criminal justice field. It's not just policing. It's not just corrections. So there are so many things. And then from there, I give them websites that they can go and see and explore. One website is USA, I forget the website. I will pull it up 1 second. But it just lets them know that they can go and research the different types of jobs, and it will let them know that they can make their own journey on this path, right? So some of the crime shows actually have been misleading to a lot of the students coming in. The CSI crime shows, for one, right? So I remember when the CSI crime shows began, enrollment was high in the criminal justice classes, in the courses. I mean, waiting room only type situation, right? And a lot of them were coming in with the idea and expectations that what they saw on TV was what their career path would look like or what they would be experiencing in the field. Whether it be driving the Hummer around Coral Gables or, wearing the high heels, collecting, blood splatter, whatever. And I had to be the one that explained to them what these crime shows were and what they were not, and what the criminal justice field actually was. And from that, a lot of them, and again, you can see the expression on their face was like, what? They now understood that it it's different. It's not real. What you're seeing on TV a lot of times is for entertainment purposes only. And maybe they should have this a little disclaimer on a lot of these TV shows, the procedural ones, right? The scripted ones for entertainment purposes only. Because it gave a lot of people false knowledge of what happens in the field. So I was able to, I still mention that because a lot of them still watch it. But now we have so much more realistic crime shows on court TV and TV shows like 48 Hours, The Next 48, where it's a little more realistic, though they only show the exciting cases, right? They don't show the ones, right? They're not going to show the ones where the detective is sitting there for 12 hours, but they show the exciting ones. So I explain to my students my journey, and I start from the very beginning. That gives them an understanding of where their journey is going and what they can expect. And then I allow them to relax in their own journey, right? Because they have to understand it's a process. Everyone doesn't jump from getting their bachelor's degree to FBI agent. Some can, but not everybody does that, right? So there needs to be a process. There needs to be steps. And I tell them what the steps are, right? So I want them to be successful. So my whole goal is for them to create a map for themselves. What is it that they have to do? How do they go about doing it? What should they do, right? And they can ask me throughout the semester, throughout their time at Miami-Dade College, Dr. Alleyne, what should I do now? How do I go about doing this? I want to do X, Y, and Z. And I will be there every step of the way to help them on their journey, on their path.
My question
Wow.
is, because I love CSI, I would be really one of those students, be super disappointed if my professor told me it ain't like CSI, Shireen. Did you have a lot of dropouts after you told them the truth?
Not so much. It was a more of a let me rethink. They didn't drop out, but let me rethink what it is that I'm going to do. Okay, if this is not real, then what is it that I want to do? Do I want to go to law school? Do I want to be a correction officer? Do I want to? So there was a shift in thinking, not necessarily truth, but a shift in thinking.
Okay.
But I made sure that they understood that reality, what you see on TV is two vastly different things.
And that's important. That's very important to let anyone know that wants to start any sort of career, what it's really going to be like for them. But also, your life is a canvas. So if you change your career 3 or 4 times in your life, that's totally fine. So what you started out with is not necessarily how you're going to end your life. So don't put too much pressure on yourselves regarding that. But why anyway? So I'd love to just ask you about true crime podcasts, Nancy, because the true crime podcasts that we all know and love tend to focus really heavily on the gore and the mystery, But from an academic perspective, why is the biggest thing mainstream true crime media consistently gets completely wrong about how real investigations work?
Well, that would be the scope, the pace, and what police actually do, right? So a lot of times, and I'll go back to CSI and a lot of these scripted shows, the podcasts And I was listening to one that was very intriguing. The Adan Syed case
Mhm.
from Serial.
Right.
And I was into that. But what we have to understand from a listener point of view is that the podcast is condensing things, is uh, editing things, right? So when we think, oh, they solved this in 45 minutes, minus the commercials, a lot of people expect that a real crime will be solved in that amount of time or quickly. That DNA is always going to be present in every crime that you have, or that there's always going to be a reliable eyewitness, right? And that's not true, right? And a lot of the podcasts will have your witnesses, will have DNA. The TV shows will have the DNA. They will have witnesses. They'll have these fancy, technologically advanced screens that, touch in the air. And so a lot of these departments don't have money for that. They don't have that. They don't have the money for these equipments. They don't have the technology. So now when you're a podcast listener, you're watching these crime shows and you get called in to serve jury duty, your expectation now is, oh, okay, so these police departments got to have blah 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 blah, as I saw on that TV show, or I listened to this podcast and they were able to da 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 da. Why can't these police officers do that? Right. So again, right, there's a little bit of a false expectation when it comes to the listeners when real crime is at stake, right? They believe that it's solvable within an unreasonable amount of time, that the evidence that is collected or not collected should or should not be there, when in reality it's something different. So there's a little disconnect there from some of it, all of it, but some of it.
Yeah. I mean, some of the podcasts are actually really good, because it's the one that I know, I think my sister listens to it, then I hear her sometimes when I'm driving in the car with her. It's two lawyers that are trying to um, explain to the listeners everything that's not heard about the case, what they don't hear in the mainstream media. So they explain things better, they give you all the extra factors that are being considered, what it's really like as a lawyer, what they have to take into consideration. So some of them actually are quite informative depending on the perspective that they're coming from.
Exactly.
These two were lawyers in that specific genre. And I
Right.
believe the case that they were talking about was the two actors. What was the lady's name? The sexual
Oh,
Maldoni is the guy, I think. And uh, the woman,
no, which one that
anyways,
is.
it was two actors, and she accused him of sexual harassment on the movie scene and set. I can't remember the name, but anyway, these two lawyers in the podcast were giving the lowdown of everything that's not mentioned in the media of what's really going on and why the process is taking so long, because it has been taking so long. It's very drawn out, and they were just giving some really important information. So some of them get it right, to my point in what I was saying. So, but there are some that, yeah, that
It's
as we mentioned,
sensational, right?
yeah,
They talk about the hot topics, but don't
right,
delve deep into the specifics of it.
Right, because it's all about listeners, hey? How many listenings they can get
Absolutely.
and downloads they can get. So they'll just stick to the juicy parts, right? People want to
Absolutely.
hear the
Absolutely.
juicy parts. Okay,
Nancy,
you
I
may
have a question. Yep, Nancy, you mentioned that you teach in for the associate's degree students and for the bachelor's degree students, right? What is the difference, from the program perspective of both and for job opportunities for the students once they graduate Miami-Dade College?
great question.
Well, it's one program. It's just split, right? So some
Okay.
so some just come in for their associates, and those are lower level courses. So your 100, your 200. So your introduction to criminal justice, your introduction to criminology, those sort of courses. From there, they can move on to the 300 to 400 level courses and complete their bachelor's at Miami-Dade College. Some will come in just to do their associates at Miami-Dade and then transfer out to other universities to complete that. Some will come in because they're already working in the field and they want to get their associates or they want to get their bachelor's. So it's different types of students coming in for different types of reasons. The job perspective, depending on what it is that they want to do, is wide open, right? So many of them come in and they want to go to law school. So Miami-Dade College School of Justice has a 3+3 program with St. Thomas University, right? So they want to be a lawyer. They want to, they know for sure that this is their path. So with the 3+3 program, we will have a specific pathway, a journey for them to follow to take their courses, some of their courses at Miami-Dade College and some of their courses at St. Thomas University so that they can finish their degree, their Juris Doctorate degree, they're becoming a lawyer much faster. So for that, it depends, right? I've just had a student who just emailed me and said, "Thank you, Professor. I just became a probation officer." And I was like, I was touched. Right. And she said it was all because of me, right? The stories that I told in classroom. I was able to, I know at one point they had internships, right? And so I was sending my students doing internships there so they would get an idea. I've had students as well take some classes and afterwards they're like, "Professor, thank you. Now I know what I don't want to do. I do not want to do this," right? And I think it was a corrections course I taught. They were like, "Oh, no, 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 no." Right? So depending on the course, depending on the student, they will understand what it is that they want to do and how they want to do it. And previously, I had mentioned that there's a website that I give my students so that they can look more for information. I was able to find it. It's called Occupational Outlook Handbook, and it is by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a government website, and so for them, for my students, I tell them to go on there, type in a job that you want to do, and what it will do. Let's say correctional officer or probation officer or lawyer. And they type it in. And what will happen is that it will pop up with what you need to do to become this, right? So it gives them step by step. You need to have a 4-year degree. You need to take this test. You need to blah, 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 blah. You need to blah, 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 right? So for them, that's another added checklist for them that they can have. They can go back to this website. Again, it's Occupational Outlook Handbook. It's by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They just put in the job that they want, and it gives them, the outlook for this job. Is it going to increase? Is it going to decrease? Should they move outside of Florida because the pay will be better? Right? Or should they stay within Florida? So I give them as much help as possible along the way so that they can be successful. And the courses are built so that they will get experience. Because many times the students come in, they don't know what they want to do. Right? Mm-hmm. So the courses themselves allows them to be able to think about their career. Like, oh, I like this. I like the juvenile delinquency. I didn't think I would like, talking about the juvenile issues and juvenile problems within society. Maybe I want to become a juvenile advocate or a juvenile probation officer, right? So these courses allow the students to really think and see for themselves what aligns with what they want to do, what aligns with their personality as well, and what aligns with their goal in life.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Fascinating.
It is. Wow. Thanks, Nancy. I really appreciate you elaborating on that. Tune in next week for part 3 of Friends from Wild Places.
You've been listening to Friends from Wild Places with Shireen Bueta. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast from the links to catch every episode and unleash your passion.